They say blood is thicker than water, but in the hills of southwestern Virginia, there's a place where blood ran too thick, and it poisoned everything. You're about to hear a story most Americans were never meant to know, of a family so isolated, so untouched by time, that nature began to turn on them. It begins not in some faraway land, but right here, in the belly of the Appalachian Mountains, where a forgotten bloodline lived, loved, and suffered in complete silence. For nearly a century, the outside world passed them by. No roads in, no doctors, no questions asked. A family hidden by miles of woods and generations of shame. They were born in that house, and many never left it, not even in death. And as the years passed, something went wrong. Eyes too far apart, words that came out twisted or not at all. Children with faces that didn't quite match their parents. And no one knew why, until it was too late. They were called many things by those who dared to speak about them. Ghosts, mutants, the cursed ones. But they had a name, a real one. A name carved into the land itself, and behind that name was a secret that festered in silence for decades. A truth passed down in whispers. Or not at all. What happened to them wasn't just biology. It was something deeper, something older. This isn't a ghost story. It's not folklore. It's a record, left behind in fragments. Hospital notes, court archives, yellowing photographs with scratched-out faces. And if you look closely, you'll see something in the eyes of those children. Not just deformity, not just confusion, but something else. Something that looks like fear. You see, to be born into a nightmare means there is no escape, no beginning, no end, just blood, and secrets, and silence. And tonight we're going to open that silence and walk straight into the past. But be warned, once you hear this story, you can't unhear it, and some doors, once opened, never close again. They lived in a place called Enoch Hollow. You won't find it on a modern map. It's been erased, like a wound that healed over wrong. But long before it vanished, it was home to a family that time forgot. The Tolleys, that was their name. A name once spoken softly in neighboring counties, often followed by a glance over the shoulder, as if the trees themselves were listening. The Tolleys had lived there since the 1800s. They were poor, like most families, scraping by in the post-Civil War South. But they were different, not because they chose to live apart, but because they never left. Generations came and went, marrying cousins, even siblings, some say. Whether out of necessity or a twisted sense of tradition, no one knows. But the result was unmistakable. Their children were born strange. Some never spoke. Others didn't walk upright. A few were born with faces that made even the local preacher stop visiting. Rumors spread. Stories of babies buried before they drew breath, of screams echoing through the trees at night. But no one ever dared go up the mountain. And the Tolleys, they never came down. There was one road in, overgrown and half swallowed by the earth. If you followed it, you'd find a clearing. One house made of rotting wood and rusted tin, clinging to the edge of the hill like it knew it didn't belong. That house stood for over 80 years, untouched. People said it smelled like wet stone and something sweet, like spoiled fruit. But worse than the smell was the silence. No music, no laughter, no voices, just wind through the hollow and the faint creak of boards shifting under weight that no one could see. In 1947, a social worker named Eleanor White made her way up that road. What she saw inside changed her forever. In her private notes, locked away for decades, she wrote of children with blank stares and mouths that hung open too long, of a woman with grey eyes who hadn't spoken in 13 years, and of a man, possibly the father of them all, who sat in the dark, rocking back and forth, whispering only one word: blood. When Eleanor returned, she filed a brief report. Just a few lines. No official investigation, no follow-up. And by the time anyone remembered her story, the house had collapsed. As if the land itself was trying to forget. There's a strange kind of grief that settles over places like Enoch Hollow. Not the kind that comes from losing someone you love, but from knowing that something was lost long before you were born. the kind of grief that seeps into the bones of a town and never leaves. People in the nearby counties stopped saying the Tolley's name out loud. It became bad luck, like whistling in a graveyard or stepping over a sleeping dog at midnight. You just didn't talk about them, because the truth was, they weren't entirely forgotten, they were avoided. Old-timers in Buchanan County still remember the warnings. Don't wander too far into the woods. Don't go near the old Tolley land, especially after dark. Some even claim they saw children, barefoot, filthy and pale, watching from behind trees, never blinking. Hunters found dolls nailed to trees, little wooden carvings of people with missing eyes or twisted limbs. Others said they heard chanting, not in English, not in any language they recognized. Just low murmurs, carrying through the fog like the woods themselves were breathing. In 1961, a group of teenagers decided to go looking for the remains of the Tolley house. They brought flashlights, a camera, and nerves too young to believe in fear. Only one came back. He never spoke about what he saw, not to his family, not to the police. But in the hospital, while sedated, he kept repeating one sentence. They had no faces, but they knew my name. His friends were never found. The official story was that they ran off. Teenagers do that sometimes, but not in the woods of Enoch Hollow, not with their shoes still sitting at the edge of the trail. The more you look into the Tolleys, the more the story seems to unravel, but not in the way you'd expect. There are no clear family trees, no gravestones with full names, just fragments, birth certificates with the same last names on both parent, lines, church records that suddenly stop, photos of family reunions with half the faces scratched out, and a pattern of silence stretching from one generation to the next. It's as if the entire bloodline folded inward, collapsing on itself, until it became something else entirely. Something that wasn't supposed to survive, but did. You might ask how something like this could happen in America, how a family could vanish into the trees and mutate into something barely human, but to understand that, you have to go back even further, before the Tolleys were strange, before they were even called cursed, back when they were just another poor Appalachian family, living off the land and off each other. In the 1880s, the railroad bypassed Enoch Hollow. No tracks, no roads, no way out. The town nearby moved with the times, but the Tolleys stayed behind. Some say it was stubbornness, others say they were hiding from something, draft dodgers, moonshiners, maybe worse. Whatever the reason, they married close, brother to sister, uncle to niece, generation after generation. The church knew, the county clerk knew, but no one intervened, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't dare. There's an ugliness in the American past that most people refuse to look at. It's easier to talk about wars and victories, heroes and presidents. But the truth is, this country is filled with quiet corners where history rotted, places where shame was passed down like an heirloom, where people were left behind. The Tolleys weren't just a tragedy, they were a reflection of poverty, of isolation, of what happens when society turns its back and keeps walking. By the 1970s, the family line had thinned. Children were born fewer and fewer. Some say the blood had weakened to the point that new life was almost impossible. Others say something more sinister, that the family had started to believe in their own curse, that they had begun burying babies alive, not out of malice, but out of mercy. There are reports, buried deep in local records, of tiny graves found behind the Tolley house, unmarked, some less than 2 feet long. One coroner's assistant quit the day after exhuming one. He said the infant had teeth, human, but wrong, wide set, almost animal. No one followed up. It's here the story stops being just tragic and starts becoming something else. Not quite legend, not quite myth. A kind of living nightmare stitched together from truth and trauma. Because the more you dig into the Tolley family, the more you realize this wasn't just a dark chapter in American history. It was a warning, Imagine being born into a story that already ended. A story soaked in sorrow, twisted long before you ever took your first breath. That's what it meant to be a child of the Tolley bloodline in those final years. Your fate wasn't your own. It was inherited, like a curse tucked quietly into your DNA. There's one account, half rumor, half confession, that survives from a woman named Lila. She was believed to be one of the last surviving Tolleys, born in 1982. Her foster parents claimed she would wake up screaming every night until she was 10. When asked what she dreamed of, she said only this: the door wouldn't close. He kept coming back in. Lila's eyes never matched. One was pale blue, the other brown. Her jaw was slightly misaligned, and her speech always came out stilted, like someone trying to remember a language they never fully learned. But it wasn't just her appearance that haunted people. It was the silence around her. She refused to talk about her family, but sometimes she'd hum lullabies no one could recognize, tunes without melody, sounds that made people uneasy without knowing why. One night, when she was 15, Lila disappeared, vanished without a note, without a trace. Her foster parents said the window was open and the air smelled like wet leaves. All she left behind was a photograph folded into 4 pieces. It showed a cabin in the woods, and behind it, barely visible, were 3 figures. None of them had faces. No one ever saw her again. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? If the very people meant to protect you were the same ones who buried the truth? Who twisted love into something unrecognizable? Because for the Tolleys, love didn't look like kindness. It looked like survival. It looked like silence. And sometimes it looked like a child born into a nightmare, forced to carry the sins of 100 years in a body that never asked for any of it. Some families inherit money, others land. The Tolleys inherited memory, and memory, when soaked in pain, becomes something far heavier than flesh. They say history is written by the victors, but stories like this, they survive in fragments, in half-burned photographs, in the eyes of children too afraid to speak. The Tolleys are gone now, at least in name. No official records past 1992, no headstones, no wills, just silence. But if you think the story ended when their bloodline thinned out and vanished, you'd be wrong. In 2004, a team of genealogists working on rural DNA anomalies found something strange. Markers shared by individuals across 3 counties, all traced back to a single origin. An isolated gene cluster, heavily inbred, with signs of rare mutations, and trauma indicators that suggested generational neurological damage. They didn't publish their findings. They couldn't. Too many unanswered questions, too much risk of backlash. But the files leaked, quietly, and among the scanned documents was a map, one red dot marking a patch of land no longer listed as inhabited, Enoch Hollow, circled twice, with one word scribbled next to it in black ink: contain. To this day, there are those who swear that bloodline didn't end, that the Tolleys simply disappeared into the woods, that something changed in them, something not just physical, a shift, like the body adapting to darkness too long, like the mind snapping in place to survive something it was never built to endure. One hiker claimed he found a structure deep in the hollows in 2017, a kind of shelter, handmade, covered in bones, small ones, animal maybe, but the shapes didn't make sense. He said the air around it was cold, even in midsummer, that he felt watched, not hunted, just observed, like whatever was out there wanted him to see it, but not understand it. He never went back. He moved states, and when asked why, all he said was, it wasn't empty. People forget how close darkness lives to the surface. They think horrors like this only exist in fiction. But what happened in that hollow was real. It breathed, it bled, and worst of all, it was allowed to happen, not because no one knew, but because no one cared. There's a cabin now, or what's left of it, just splintered wood and rusted nails, half buried beneath decades of fallen leaves. If you go there, and some still try, you'll hear nothing. Not the birds, not the wind, just stillness, so thick it presses against your chest like a warning. People say places hold memory, that wood can absorb grief, that soil remembers blood. If that's true, then the ground in Enoch Hollow is soaked with memory too foul to name. The Tolleys may be gone, but their story isn't. It lingers, passed down in whispers, denied by officials, preserved only in the quiet, uncomfortable questions people still don't want to ask. What makes a family rot from the inside? Is it blood, isolation, sin, or is it simply the human cost of being forgotten? Because that's what happened here. A family wasn't just neglected, they were erased. Left alone until the line between human and horror blurred, until love turned to ritual, until life became a closed loop of silence, shame, and survival. No one's built anything on that land, no cell towers, no cabins, not even trails. Some say the soil won't take a foundation, that roots won't grow straight there. A local surveyor once tried to map the area. His equipment kept failing, GPS flickered, compass spun. The same report marked the area as unstable, though the earth had never once shifted. Sometimes when the fog rolls in low and the light hits just right, people say they see figures standing just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, not angry, not violent, just still, like shadows that forgot how to move. But maybe the most terrifying part of this story isn't the mutation, not the silence, not even the missing children. It's this: nothing stopped it. Generations lived and died under the same roof, in the same hollow, carrying the same broken name, and no one came. No doctor, no preacher, no law. America didn't forget them. It abandoned them. And in that abandonment, something ancient was born, a horror made not of monsters but of people, people who once laughed, who once hoped, who once had no idea what they would become. You've just seen a history most won't believe, but it happened, and like all true American horrors, it didn't end with a scream. It ended with silence, and silence never stays buried forever. End.